And good evening, and thank you for joining us. My name is Ryan Burrows, Executive Director of the American Kratom Association, and we are joined this evening by Matt Caddo, Senior Fellow on Public Policy. We called this meeting tonight to discuss our latest announcement on consumer guidelines to help combat confusion about kratom products and to push the FDA to do their actual job. We also hope that as many of you as possible will be joining us next week, November 13th, on Capitol Hill for the Congressional Briefing and reception centered around the federal KCPA. We will discuss details around the event and take any questions that you have. And with that, I will now turn it over to Mac.
Thank you, Ryan, and welcome to everyone. Thank you for joining this webinar this evening. As all of you know, this is probably the most significant event that we are going to have the opportunity to participate in protecting the legal access to kratom since 2016. That fight was, of course, the seminal moment in the history of kratom in the United States, when the rally that took place, along with all of the collateral lobbying and advocacy outreach that occurred in that window of only 30 days, because they announced, as everyone can remember, at the end of August, and they used the emergency powers section of the Controlled Substances Act. And when I say they, meaning the FDA, they had petitioned the DEA to do it. The DEA had accepted it. And what that did was say that in 30 days, without any public comment, the kratom would become scheduled for a period of 2 years on a temporary scheduling basis. And in that 2-year period, then the FDA would have been required to fully develop the 8 factors that are required under the Controlled Substances Act to petition for permanent scheduling. So while it was 2 steps, it was a foregone conclusion that the DEA, after the publication of the notice, would, within that 30-day window, schedule a kratom for that 2-year interim period, and then ultimately we, of course, would have been scheduled. And the history on this astounded all of the experts in Washington, with good cause, by the way, because there were 82 previous scheduling recommendations using the emergency power section, which is designed, by the way, to actually remove street drugs that pop up, and they need quick, assertive action by the government in order to swat them down. That, of course, was not the case with kratom. Even in the application that was made by the FDA, they cited deaths that occurred back in 2009. So there's no way that they really met the criteria anyway, but they were, as they typically do when they want to get their way, the FDA resorts to abusing their power. And that's what they did in this case. But in that 30-day window was an amazing response by the kratom advocacy community. More than 145,000 signatures went on a petition to the White House We the People website saying that kratom should not be banned. Then we went to an interesting experience for the DEA. Their public affairs person told us later that they had received over 6,000 phone calls in the first couple of weeks in September, telling them not to ban kratom. And of course, we had the enormous number of members of Congress, 51 members, evenly split virtually, 25 Democrats, 26 Republicans, and we had 13 members of the Senate with a wide philosophical diversity. All of that happened, and then the rally that happened as well. They're convinced the DEA that the FDA had hoodwinked them. And there's no other way to sugarcoat that. They hoodwinked them into believing something that was not true. And that's been validated time and time again. And since then, the FDA has made repeated attempts to ban kratom. They've been unsuccessful because they simply don't have the scientific evidence that's required for it. They have repeatedly used and abused their various regulatory powers as weapons in order to try to stifle kratom, and they continue to do it to this day. As I sit here right now, the FDA does not have the evidence to demonstrate conclusively that kratom is in fact dangerous. And if they were put to the test to swear under oath that that was the case, they wouldn't show up for court. I guarantee it, because they know that they don't have the scientific evidence. They're using their bully pulpit to bludgeon the kratom community in order to try to force them into submission. The only solution to this is the same one that the US Congress adopted back in 1994, when the FDA was behaving in exactly the same way, trying to ban all dietary supplements and vitamins from the marketplace. And had they been successful, there would have been more than 50,000 products either taken off the market, or you'd have been criminalized for using them if the FDA had been able to persuade the Congress to do what they're trying to do with Kratom today. Congress stepped in, passed the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act, and they clearly were in a position to fight back, gave the tools for consumers to fight back, and forced the FDA to regulate dietary supplements appropriately. That's what we need to do today, and that's why the Federal Kratom Consumer Protection Act is critically important to put parameters and guardrails around the FDA going forward. That bill, when passed, will be the most important legislative effort that we've embarked on. Even though we've done well in the states, we need this federal legislation. So what we're asking each of you to do, and for those of you that are on the fence right now thinking about, should I come to Washington? We need you here. We know that it's a sacrifice, both in terms of your financial resources and your time. We're starting in the Christmas holiday season, and I understand fully that these are the kinds of time periods where it really is tougher to get out of town to come to Washington, D.C. But the way that the timing has developed and evolved, this is the lot that we've been cast, and we have to take advantage of it. So any of you that are sitting out there thinking, and you're on the fence and you're trying to figure out if you should come to Washington or not, we need you. We need you here in order to have your voice raised with your congressional delegation to tell them how important it is for Kratom to be protected from the FDA, from the trial attorneys that are trying to ban Kratom. And make no mistake, that's their objective. They want to be able to ban Kratom because it builds their ability in court to point to Kratom and say, even the federal government has banned it. So when they try their cases on product liability suits, which are for the most part wholly bogus, and I would carve out an exception for adulterated products, and obviously that needs to be corrected, and this bill will go a long way to doing that, forcing and compelling the FDA to actually regulate Kratom the way they should be doing as required by the statutes. So it's critically important that we get that message across with your ability to tell your congressional delegation exactly what your story is. And we have repeated it over and over again that the most powerful lobbyist voice that is heard by a legislative official comes from their constituent with their personal story. You don't have to know the science about Kratom with any specifics. You don't have to quote the script and verse of those scientific results. You just have to tell them that your personal experience has shown that Kratom has helped you improve the quality of your life or has saved your life. And for those that use Kratom as you would a cup of coffee for the energy boost and the increased focus, you have the fundamental freedom to have the choice be yours to responsibly consume Kratom products. And you shouldn't be stripped of freedom by a bully regulatory agency like the FDA. And so with that conglomerate of voices that are raised, it becomes critically important for us to move forward. So a couple of things that are important about logistics. And again, I encourage you to come. I encourage you to sacrifice, stretch a little bit, recruit some of your family and friends to help you if it's a financial burden. Do whatever you can in order to join us on this particular day. The logistics for the meeting are fairly straightforward in terms of what our objectives are, but they require some attention to detail. So, for example, we will have everyone meet, for those that are able to get to town in time, to meet at 8:30 in the morning on the 13th. And we're going to do that in the Dirksen Deli. It's called the Senate Deli. It's on the first floor of the Dirksen building. And as you go through security, and you should come through the C Street exit, or entrance rather, that's the most convenient way to get to the deli. But whatever entrance you use to get in to the Senate office complex, just ask the security people there where the Senate Deli is over in the Dirksen building, and they'll easily be able to get you there. We want to meet at 8:30 because we're going to give you some materials that we would like you to deliver to your congressional delegation. If you are from the same state, partner up, and this will be a way for you to be able to go and visit each of your individual congressional members. We'll start on the Senate side, since we're in the Dirksen building, and obviously everyone would have 2 senators to go and meet. We would like you to call in advance of the 13th tell the office, ask for the staffer who handles FDA issues, and tell them that you want to come by and visit with them on the morning of the 13th of December between about 9 o'clock and 11 o'clock. You should be able to do that for your 2 United States senators. And when you go, we'll have materials available for you that we want you to drop off that will help that staffer understand exactly what's going on. And for those visits that take place prior to the briefing, which starts at 11:30, we need you to ask the staff member that you visit with on the United States Senate side to attend that briefing. That will allow them to get an in-depth view of what the science is on kratom. Following the briefing, we need you to then go to the House side. So in the afternoon, if you'll schedule meetings with your congressional representative, if you've teamed up with a couple of others, people from the same state, then you can go visit each one of your congressional members, because your congressional district will have a different representative. Same message, obviously. Understand kratom, co-sponsor the KCPA, and invite them to then reach out with the materials that you'll have to learn more about kratom by going to kratomanswers.org and other various websites, which we'll point you to. For the briefing itself, in order to get into the room where this particular briefing is going to be held, it is in the Capitol Visitor Center. And the entrance to that, the Capitol Visitor Center, is on the east side of the Capitol. So if you're looking at the Washington Monument, you will then see the Capitol Dome, and then in front of that, on the east side, you will see the Capitol Visitor Center. It's actually underground. You go down a level, and you go through security. For this particular briefing, you will go through 2 levels of security. First is the visitors entrance for the general public, and that's just a screening for it's a metal detector screening, like similar to what you'd see at an airport. Then once you get into the visitor center, and it is a magnificent facility, by the way, you will see off to the right, there is a desk for people to check in order to go into the Senate side meeting rooms. You will have to produce a photo ID, which we matched against a visitors list that we have to submit to the United States Senate in order for them to qualify you to enter this area for this meeting. So you have to register, and you have to register with the name that's on your government issued photo ID. Nicknames won't work. They need to be able to look at you, see your face. No one's going to be able to sneak in. So you just have to follow these protocols, and it's very important that you do so. Then after you've cleared into the area where the meeting's going to be held, you'll be able to see the sign out in front of our briefing room. And this is where you're going to be able to participate in hearing from an outstanding panel of scientists and policymakers that will be briefing the congressional staff on this important issue. Dr. Nora Volkow, who is the director of the National Institute on Drug Abuse, accepted the invitation to participate on this panel. I have to tell you that is significant, because she is a peer of the Commissioner of the Food and Drug Administration, and she's going to be able to describe specifically her experience. She told me in a meeting I had with her last week that she has personally done kratom research in her lab at the National Institute on Drug Abuse. So this isn't someone who is just casually associated with it. She has actually tested it, experimented in the lab, and her conclusions that she will share demonstrate how kratom is a potential harm reduction tool that needs to be available to the American public. It needs to be, in a regulated fashion, available for consumers to responsibly consume. And that will be a valuable voice that's added to it, because there can be no doubt that she's an independent voice. Along with her will be Dr. Jack Henningfield, long-term kratom researcher, formerly a division director at the National Institute on Drug Abuse, and an individual we all know in the community, because he stepped up in 2016 and offered on a pro bono basis to produce an 8-factor analysis, which is what the FDA legally is required to produce. And he did it with the accurate science. And when the FDA, as we all know, threw theirs across the threshold, when it was evaluated by Dr. Brett Chua in 2018, who was then the Assistant Secretary for Health and the designated official under the Controlled Substances Act to review that material. And it was his characterization that the FDA had embarrassingly poor evidence and data and a failure to consider the overall public health in their petition to schedule. Nothing has improved for the FDA since. All of the research that's developed points to kratom being available to consumers because there is no known toxic level on which a fatality would occur from kratom alone. That's the scientific fact. There are people that can express their opinions about it and based on their own experiences, but not on the science. And so Dr. Henningfield will certainly be talking about that. He will be joined by Dr. Kirsten Smith, who currently is the lead researcher on kratom at Johns Hopkins University. She formerly and most recently was with the National Institute on Drug Abuse and a known expert in the kratom field. You also have Dr. Marilyn Eustace, who is with the Thomas Jefferson University out of Philadelphia, is a renowned forensics toxicologist who headed up that division at the National Institute of Drug Abuse, is known around the world as an expert in this area. And then finally, we'll have as a panelist, James Carroll, who was formerly the White House drug czar and the director of the Office of National Drug Control Policy. That panel is an all-star panel by any description and unassailable in terms of the credentials that they bring to the table, and they will be able to provide a powerful briefing to the Senate staffers and the House staffers and any members that may come to that particular meeting. That will be followed by a Q&A after the panel makes the presentation. We ask everyone to allow for the staff members to do that questions and not any of our advocates. This is a time for staff members to be briefed, and we are observers at this point. And so we ask you to respect that, but you will be there. We'll have some buttons available for everyone to identify. I hope that's true. We're planning on it. And identify you as a kratom advocate, and we'll want everyone, of course, to be wearing those. But this particular session from 11:30 to 1 is exclusively for Senate staffers to be able to interact with the time that's available for Q&A in that particular session. So that'll be great if you'll honor that. Then, as I said earlier, there will be lunch provided. But if you making sure you register, there will be food available. It is possible, and this is an outlier, and this is part of politics. I put my hat on as a former campaign manager. There are sometimes events that kind of get out of control because more people show up than you thought would show. We have to understand that could happen here. Excuse me. We may have some Senate and House staffers who show up at the last minute, and they can get through the security just with their staff badges, and they'll walk into the room, and we may not have enough food. So we're going to ask our advocates to kind of hang back and see how many staffers are there and let them eat first. That's just an accommodation and a courtesy to them, and we can follow up with that. But we'd ask you to just respect that. So hang back a little bit when just before the event starts and they start serving food, and then you'll be able to gauge. And our staff will be there to help you understand that. But we'd ask you to respect that. After the briefing is concluded, we would ask that, and then you deploy to the other congressional offices that you have not yet met with and finish off those meetings. And even if you aren't able to secure a meeting, going to their offices provides you the opportunity to drop off the material and see if you can catch some of those staffers on the fly. That happens all the time. You just have to be forthright when you come in and say, I want to talk to the staffer in charge of FDA stuff, and I'd like to speak with them for a few minutes. And as a constituent, you have the ability to do that, and they generally will honor it. After the end of that afternoon, we're asking everyone around 5:30 or so to head over to the Russell Senate office building in room 385, and we're going to have a reception. And there, we hope to have some members of the Senate and the House, who particularly are co-sponsors, that will come by and greet everyone. Maybe we'll get some pictures, that kind of thing. I think that would be a fabulous opportunity for all of the kratom advocacy community to gather around and help. There are always logistics that are involved with these kinds of events. We think we have a good plan in place. but we have to be a bit flexible. If you're headed to Washington and you're driving, I recommend you park at Union Station. That's the safest and the most secure area to park a car. It's hit and miss up on Capitol Hill if you want to spend the day, and you're better off at Union Station. And I think that that will serve everyone well if they do that. It is a 3-block walk from Union Station over to the Senate buildings, and then another block and a half over to the Senate Visitor Center. But I think that'll be the best way for everyone to do that. And by the way, when you go through both the Senate and the House office buildings, you'd have to be rescreened under the metal detectors, but it's generally an easy process. Sometimes, depending on activities in Washington, you may have a long line, and just dress for the weather so that you're not uncomfortable as you stand in line to get in. But that's generally the way it happens. We will have a meeting on December 11th for those that have registered for the briefing on the 13th. And if you're registered, you'll get a link to the follow-up meeting. And there we're going to talk about last minute, anything we've learned, last minute directions and instructions of how you can adapt to whatever changes we have to make. But that's clearly where we are at this point, and we encourage everyone who has signed up to participate in that meeting on December 11th as we go through. So with that, I'll stop. We'll open it up for questions. Let me just say 2 things before we do that. There's some significant things that are going on in our community right now. Everyone can expect probably what I would characterize as a major hit job on Kratom, on the Kratom industry, on the Kratom community, on the AKA, and others that are pro-Kratom advocates from a media operation called the Tampa Bay Times. This is just the reality of life, and we've gotten the attention of the trial attorneys who are involved in this, and based on what we have seen from various postings on social media sites, it seems very clear to us that there is a connection between the trial attorneys in Florida, who are very active in soliciting cases, and the Tampa Bay Times pushing this. Because I can tell you, in my experience of 50 years in this business, I have never seen such a slanted, biased set of questions that are promulgated by this newspaper consistently. I've been through multiple interviews with them, just got another one today. All of these questions are in the vein of saying, well, if you stop beating your wife. In this case, they're saying, how can you justify advocating for people to use Kratom when it's so dangerous? They take the premise of the FDA and the trial attorneys right from the get-go. So just be aware that that's going to happen, and we need to fight back hard. Secondly, I'll tell you that there are people in the Kratom community that are the quintessential examples of people shooting themselves in the foot. I know that there are people that feel like they should have better recognition in this community. I know that there are advocates who have sincerely and with goodwill have put a lot of effort that haven't been properly recognized. And I know that it's easy to resent that. But what and I think we need to find ways to do that, by the way. But there's another group within our community that are just hateful people. And they decide that they're going to be as destructive as they can be. And they take every opportunity to try to criticize the Kratom Consumer Protection Act. They try to criticize the people that are involved in advocating for it. They take shots at other advocates. They take shots at the AKA. They take shots at the people of the AKA, like me and Ryan and others. These are hateful people that simply are not voices that need to be recognized or treated with respect, because in order to get respect, you have to show respect. And so I think that we're at a point in this community where some people just simply have to come into the fold and understand that maybe they had their feelings hurt, maybe things aren't done exactly the way they would want them to do. But I can assure you, we're doing things in good faith. We're trying our best in order to protect the legality of Kratom. And look where we are today. There was a ban that's been proposed by the FDA 3 times, and Kratom is still legal in the United States. We have had obvious efforts by various entities in the government in order to stop Kratom from being accessible to the public, and it's still available. we're going to continue to fight. We're going to continue to fight shoulder to shoulder with all that will stand up and responsibly advocate for kratom that should be regulated in a way that protects consumers in the same way that other dietary supplements and botanical supplements are regulated, not with extra authorities the FDA would like to. If they can't get a ban, they're going to try to put us out of business other ways in terms of having access to kratom. So we're going to continue to fight that. So I'll end there. Say thank you to everyone. We'll open it up for Q&A, and Ryan, I'll turn it back to you.
Great, thank you, Mac. And just for clarification, again, which committee will be hearing this on December 13th?
Okay, this is a congressional briefing that is organized by the American Kratom Association to provide the opportunity for Senate and House staffers and members to hear exactly the update on science. This is not a congressional hearing. This is a congressional briefing. When hearings are held in the Senate, it will be before the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, the Health Committee, and over on the House side will be the Energy and Commerce Committee. And those committee hearings and the schedules for them will be probably mapped out over the first of the, just after the first of the year. We'll start to see how the committees are going to start looking at this. But we need to get our voices out there to make sure that they understand, all of these members understand how important it is, and that will lead to it being placed on a committee calendar.
Thank you, Mac. And we're collecting emails to hand to all representatives per the consumers' states. Do you think that'll help? Absolutely.
Every voice that we can add, and you being a surrogate and a representative for other voices, powerful thing, absolutely do it. And we certainly want to make sure that everybody hears that. I have heard from people that some of our anti-kratom people, that they're going to show up. They will not be as strong as we are, but they're going to try to bring pictures of their loved ones. And they're going to tug on the emotional heartstrings of people. We sympathize, or I'm sorry, we empathize with them because any loss of a family member is certainly tragic, and understand that. But I got to tell you that when people that are the advocate leaders of that group lose their credibility, when they're unwilling to engage in any civil discourse, and they no longer need to be treated as though they are just this innocent party coming to the table. If they're not willing to look at the science, if they're not willing to join us in responsibly regulating kratom that would save the lives if we got adulterated products off the market, and equally important, perhaps more important, that the products are labeled properly so that people can make judgments about how they use kratom, then that's where we need to be. But they're not willing to do that. They've shown it time and time again. And again, they're driven by the trial attorneys who have a different agenda than finding the truth. They want to simply find a pocket of money. And that's the bottom line. And to do that, they want to ban kratom. So if you come with emails and pictures of your family members who have been helped by, saved by kratom, do that, because we can match them and exceed any impact they have when they come. I don't begrudge their ability to speak out. They are free to do that. That's what this country was founded on. But they can't make up stuff, and they can't try to create a set of facts for which there is no justification or scientific evidence to back it up. That's why this briefing is going to be very important.
Thank you. And will passing the federal KCPA shut down small batch vendors or vendors that have their business out of their home?
So if the FDA were doing their job right today, the kratom would be subject to regulations under the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, and it would require that every vendor that's involved in the manufacturing of a kratom product that is sold to consumers would be required to meet good manufacturing standards, which are significant in that you would have to have both the machinery and equipment and standard operating procedures that guarantee that from a lot to lot, batch to batch production record, that you can demonstrate that you are sanitizing the equipment, that you're using the proper materials. You have to have significant record keeping that is a part of that law. So for those that are not able, either financially or in terms of expertise, able to take on that assignment, then you will have to either not be in business, or you would have to merge with another company so that you could develop the kind of resources that are necessary in order to be compliant. If the FDA were doing their job, that would be the requirement today. There's no way to avoid that, by the way. That you can't go out and manufacture bottled water without having exactly the same GMP and labeling requirements that are required for regulation by the FDA. I know that there are people who say, oh, well, the AKA just wants to put us out of business in order to help the big vendors. That is not true. We support every vendor being in this marketplace to create a competitive marketplace who is able to meet and exceed the FDA standards for products. And they're daunting, but they're possible. It requires people to pay attention to them. It requires people to make an investment in it. But if your business is sound and you're able to sell it, then you will be able to survive with a regulated environment. It may require you to adjust some of your thinking and some of the personnel and your investment in your business to be successful.
What professionals do you expect the anti-kratom people to have?
Well, that's unknown at this point. I frankly expect that we might see some of the trial attorneys with them. They're just hell bent, the trial attorneys, to try to do everything they can in order to demonize kratom. And I'll give you an example. There's one of the leading trial attorneys. If you go to his website about kratom, he's quoting Scott Gottlieb, who says kratom is an opioid. That's from 2016. That has been debunked, discredited. Everybody knows that that was nonsense. And yet he treats it as a fact. And he uses that to seduce people to come into the fold to add their names to kratom lawsuits. That's an example of how the truth doesn't matter to the trial attorneys. One thing matters, and that's money at the end of their journey. If they were doing their job, if they were truly interested in protecting the safety of the American people with respect to kratom regulation, they wouldn't be fighting for a ban. They'd be suing the FDA. Because if there is a party that is ultimately responsible for allowing dangerous, adulterated kratom products on the marketplace, it's the Food and Drug Administration. They refuse to do their job. And if the trial attorneys wanted to, they could put heat on the FDA. Now, here's the bottom line. Why don't they sue the FDA? Because there's no money there. They can't get any financial recovery. So these morally superior trial attorneys get up and say how concerned they are about the American people and about specifically kratom consumers, and it's nonsense. Because if they really were that concerned, they'd be joining in a lawsuit against the FDA.
Thank you. And a question here, will any of it be televised?
This is an interesting situation because the Senate Ethics Committee controls all of the publication, including videos. We believe that we have secured approval to video it and to live stream it and record it, obviously. And so we will do that as long as they allow us to do it. We're in the last stages of demonstrating that we're going to do it. One of the requirements they have, for example, is you can't put the video up on a web page that has a request for donations. They don't want a Senate activity to be used in order to generate contributions to a nonprofit. So there are a few hoops that we have to jump through. We're going to do that. And then we'll hopefully have it up so that people can see it. But we will certainly video it and then be able to play it back later.
And any update on the Illinois KCPA and Illinois just banned sales of kratom? The mayor has major concerns on regulation. Anything we can do?
Well, the best thing to do is educate people. We're following the Antioch situation. We're very unhappy about it. This has been replicated in some jurisdictions around the country. The FDA continues to persist in their disinformation campaigns. All we can do is keep plodding along, educating as we go forward. The Illinois KCPA will be refiled. We got strong sponsors, and I've been working with many of the Illinois legislature, and we're doing well there. And it's just a matter of getting the regulatory agencies in line to understand what their particular responsibilities will be and figuring out how they can make sure they're not going to be dipping into taxpayer coffers in order to properly regulate kratom, which our bill requires all of that to be funded by the vendors.
Perfect. And a question about nearby hotels. Just Nick, I can tell you that the nearest hotel is the Capitol Hill Hotel. There's also a Hilton, a Hyatt, and a Marriott nearby as well. I'm not sure what rates are at this point. If you go a little further out into Virginia, those rates will be more affordable, but you just have to work out the transportation to get back into the city. And then you did touch on this, Mac, but is it reasonable to bring pictures of people who have had drastic improvements in their activities of daily living, even to the point of previously on disability, and now they are working? Sorry, you're answering this now. So we answered that. Perfect. Apparently, there was a recent death where the person died from an enlarged heart and swelling in the brain. And the medical examiner stated that the person died from complications from consuming kratom. Is there some new medical evidence that proves kratom can cause an enlarged heart or swelling in the brain? If not, how are these medical examiners able to do this?
So some of this is unknown. And I say that because the way that the reporting system works on adverse events for dietary and botanical supplements in the United States is that there is a MedWatch program, which is the adverse event reporting system that's maintained by the Food and Drug Administration. So what they do is they take from consumers and medical professionals reports of every adverse event that occurs, and the data that is submitted along with the adverse event, and then there's a process the FDA follows. So if there were a cluster of kratom-involved deaths that are reported to this adverse event reporting system that showed that there was a connection to the consumption of kratom with another product, then that investigation would require the manufacturer of the other product, let's say it's a prescription medication, to do a specific investigation. It requires the kratom vendor to do an investigation, and they report, and then the FDA makes a determination as to whether or not there needs to be a warning that is applied to the prescription medication not to use kratom while using that medication, or in the case of a dietary supplement, not to use kratom with this particular thing. And so the FDA would do that. There hasn't been a specific request by the FDA to anyone that we're aware of that they use that what they call them black box warnings in order to guard against the interactions that occur. A second level of this question, and it's a great one, by the way, people have underlying health conditions that they can just experience a fatality because their time's up. And it's any number of issues. They could have long-term cardiac disease and they drop over dead, and you could easily blame it on their consumption of celery that day, or the air that they breathed, or coffee that they drank, or alcohol they consumed, or a cigarette that they smoked. The fact that medical examiners are today attuned to the presence of mitragynine is because of two factors. One is the FDA continues to spout their disinformation that dramatically impacts the medical community. Just Google kratom, and what do you see? The Mayo Clinic, first thing that pops up because the SEO's algorithms put it there, and they claim the kratom is dangerous and unsafe, and they've not done one lick of scientific research. Not a single penny at the Mayo Clinic has been expended on kratom research. They simply repeat and republish what the FDA says. And so you get a double hit. The FDA says it, then the Cleveland Clinic says it, then the Mayo Clinic says it, and WebMD says it, and none of them are doing any independent research. So that's a problem, but it doesn't mean it's the truth. But these medical examiners are human beings. They're influenced by it. They go to their medical examiner conferences and they hear the lie that the FDA tells. And I stress that it's a lie because you can take this to the bank. The FDA today, if they were put under oath, would not be able to testify that kratom is dangerous. They can't. They can say it on their website. They can say it as they promote their narrative in the social media platforms. But when push comes to shove, if they were held to the account of swearing under oath, they can't do it. And that's a fact. Now, I know people say, how do you know? I promise you it's a fact. And you're going to know pretty clearly in the next few days that they've already said it. It is not something that the FDA can prove. So given that, these medical examiners have been misled. They hear about it at medical examiner conferences. They read what the FDA says. And so kratom pops on a talk screen. Kratom's the problem. And in fact, when you dig down, and we've done it, we know a couple of things. One, there is no known level of kratom toxicity that is identified by any scientific standard for which a medical examiner coroner could say kratom caused the death. There is none. Now, can you find a circumstance in which a person used an adulterated kratom product? Did that cause a fatality? Yes. No question about that. And we've had ample evidence of that. The medical examiners simply aren't tuned to that. They're just listening to the FDA. Then medical examiners can say, well, you know what? I see that they had a lot of kratom in their system, a lot being defined as their judgment. They've read it in the FDA or they read it from a medical examiner conference report or something. And I'm telling you, the bottom line is that there's no known toxicity level, but there's plenty of science where it's been tested at multiples up to 400 times the amount of metrogene that any human could consume didn't cause a death in a test animal, which is the gold standard for evaluation of safety of dietary supplements and botanical supplements. So those are the facts. There's always an outlier. There's always the possibility that someone can abuse kratom in a way that will cause a fatality. If they take a kratom product where the recommended serving size is going to be, 4 grams and they take 100 grams, yeah, maybe that could cause a problem. But I can assure you, you can go buy cough syrup down at your local CVS, and I did it today because I'm making a presentation on this tomorrow to a reporter. And if I came home and drank that entire bottle of cough syrup, likely I'm going to die. If I were to take loperamide, which is a popular antidiarrheal medication used by some people by taking it in large quantities to get a euphoric high, because it delivers that, hits the mu opioid receptor directly, and it creates that euphoric high, and people die from that. I can buy, and I did, loperamide today. We don't ban it. We require responsible labeling in order to control this. So that's where we are at this juncture, and we're going to continue to work to help the medical examiners and the medical community understand the truth about the science of kratom, not the lies that the FDA has been telling.
Great. Thank you, Mac. And our FOIA request to the Wisconsin State Hygiene Lab showed there's no deaths attributed to kratom. So how could that doctor get up there and testify that?
Well, first off, it's just bad information. They were misinformed. That was tragic. But that doctor, I think, was just listening to the lobbyist sitting next to her. We know that the information that that group has been espousing from the Medical Association is wrong, both on a scientific level, and even the American Medical Association does not agree with them. And they tried to say that they did, they don't. And so that's just tragic because it's misinformation promulgated by the FDA that is repeated as though it's fact when it's not.
Right. And our final question, and does giving the FDA the regulation power of kratom give the FDA the ability to ban it like they did with ephedra or tryptophan?
Very unlikely, because what the federal legislation does is that it says that the FDA would be required to establish regulatory guidelines consistent with dietary supplements. They don't get to create extraordinarily difficult. They don't get to actually promote all of that kind of extraordinary regulatory schemes. They're not allowed to do it. So that's the control that we have on it. And trust me, they would have to develop a set of regulations that are acceptable to the scientific community, because that's what the legislation would require as they do their evaluation of what their regulatory standards are. So if they came out at the end of the year and they said, oh, well, we're going to impose a regulatory standard for kratom that is more onerous than a typical dietary supplement, then they're in trouble, because they're not allowed to do that under the statute, and we would have ample opportunity to correct that.
Great. Thank you, Mac. And thank you all for joining us. We will be following up with a email with the talking points from tonight with the details for the 13th. And Mac, I will turn it over to you for closing comments.
Well, the most important thing that all of us can say to you is thank you. And really do whatever you can. I know that there are many who have registered, and part of the registration say, my plans are still up in the air. Whatever you can do to make that personal sacrifice, you need to come to Washington. We need to have your voice here, and we need to stand up and do everything we can. And I deeply appreciate those that are willing to do it. I understand the sacrifice that it requires. We're grateful to you. We're grateful for, and for those that can't make it, got it, understand. We'll just help others, give them moral support, send your story with them, just unify together. I think that'd be a terrific thing. We have this great opportunity to tell the U.S. Congress this thing that we've been telling state legislatures for a couple of years now, and we'll have the same response. And that is, people will listen, they'll respond by co-sponsoring the KCPA and ultimately passing it. Now, you can go on websites and for example, congress.gov, and it'll say, what are the chances of passage? And that's an algorithm that they've developed that looks at past bills and it looks at the co-sponsors and that kind of thing. And that number changes as we add more co-sponsors. And the more co-sponsors we get, the probability of passage increases dramatically. And so that's why we need your voice. That's why we need you to hustle these members of Congress in order, and members of the Senate, in order to co-sponsor the KCPA. So thanks to everyone. We're looking forward to seeing you. This will be a great opportunity to meet in person. For those of us that haven't had that chance yet, we're looking forward to it.
Great. Thank you, Mac. And thank you all again. And we'll be in touch with the information for the meeting next Monday for those that are registered. Have a great night.